America's success in an increasingly competitive world economy depends upon our ability to solve two major problems. First, our educational system is not producing the results our country needs. The United States economy faces a shortage of 16 million college graduates by the year 2025. For the first time in U.S. history, younger adults are less well educated than their parents. We know talent and drive are well distributed across our population, but high-income students are 7 times more likely to get a college degree than our low-income students. Our universities have to do better at nurturing that talent because we cannot meet our educational goals until we find ways for all students to succeed. The second problem is that universities exist in a competitive environment. This can work against us by keeping valuable ideas and strategies from spreading. We have hotspots of innovative student success initiatives around the country. Too often, these good ideas are staying where they're born. There are nearly 700 public universities in the U.S., enrolling almost 7 million undergraduate students. We need to spread proven innovations and scale them up from place to place. Only then can we graduate a higher number of students, including low-income students, with quality degrees. Solving these two major problems was the motivation for our 11 large public research universities to come together to form the University Innovation Alliance. We'll share practical and cost-efficient solutions proven to help students succeed and spread them across our institutions and the nation. We're going to work together to help thousands more students each year achieve a college degree. If we can do this, we can create a brighter future for students from all economic backgrounds, and we can regain America's global competitiveness for generations to come.
Please join South by Southwest EDU in welcoming the panelists of How Universities Are Crowdsourcing Innovation.
I'm going to start by introducing our distinguished panelists very briefly. There's quite a bit more you can learn about them reading their official bios, but we're going to get right into the discussion. So first, to my right, Bernadette Gray Little is Chancellor of the University of Kansas, where she's been since 2009. Previously was Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. To her right, Mark Becker, President of Georgia State U since 2009, previously Executive VP for Academic Affairs and Provost at the University of South Carolina. And to his right, Michael Crow, President, Arizona State University since 2002, previously Executive Vice Provost at Columbia University. So I moderated a similar panel about 18 months ago at the launch of the University Innovation Alliance. And these are 11 really impressive research universities doing a lot of innovative work, giant institutions with global reputations, and also very high-profile innovative leaders. The sort of folks that President Obama regularly cites as leaders in higher education. But since I'm a journalist, my job is to be skeptical, and there was part of me that wondered, how meaningful this would be, and how meaningful the effort would be in terms of real change versus window dressing and public relations. And here's why. I just this year actually covered a report by the Jack Kent Cooke Foundation, which found that the top 193 colleges in terms of competitive admissions, only 17% of their enrollments are Pell eligible students, meaning low-income students. And it gets worse the more selective you get. The top 91, only 3% of students are in the bottom quartile of income in their families, and 72% are among the wealthiest. So, in higher education, particularly at the top, among competitive institutions, rankings and prestige drive a very competitive industry. And frankly, admitting and graduating low-income students isn't rewarded by U.S. News and World Report. So it's very difficult for universities to do this work. So when the Alliance released its initial results, and remember, this is a very young process, I was impressed. Across their 11 members, they saw a 3 percentage point increase in the proportion of degrees earned by low-income students. They saw a decrease in graduation gaps between low-income students and their wealthier peers, which is really impressive, and even more impressive, an increase in the number of low-income graduates by 19%, which I want to get to a little bit of how you all have done that so fast. Obviously, some existing work you've built on and shared. But let's start with Chancellor Gray Little. Why were you initially drawn to this work, and was it a hard decision to join?
It was not a hard decision to join because the work of the Alliance was entirely consistent with goals that we had set for the university to increase retention and graduation. And increasing retention and graduation is something that we saw as a challenge for some of the reasons that you just mentioned, but also something that was absolutely necessary because an increasing percentage of our college-going population is from lower income groups. And if we don't address those groups, then we're going to be so far behind in terms of the educational level of the population. So I was very eager. It seemed like it was coming at just the right time to capture exactly what we wanted to do. But I also had some skepticism. And the skepticism was that we would invest time and that something would actually happen. Mm-hmm. And so I will say eager with a little reservation.
Sure.
That's how I agreed at the participation.
Sure, and we'll follow up on this. And by the way, I should say, Slido is making it possible for you all to ask questions that we can ask the panelists. So I think the instructions should be up there. Feel free to ask at any time, and we'll leave some time at the end of this so we can get to your questions. But now I'm going to continue to use my moderator's privilege and ask President Becker. So what challenges or tensions did you experience, either internally or externally as part of this work, meaning internally to your university and across the consortia?
Yeah, so internally, the tensions haven't been around the UIA. It's been around the disruptive nature of the work. The work itself is disruptive. We've actually, taking, for example, student advising, moved from a model where deans and department chairs had all the control and centralized it in the university and brought in technology to get results like we've never seen before. So that's really been the internal. I think within the Alliance, the tension, if you will, is these are all universities that are used to being out front, center, on their own, successful. And so your initial sort of reaction when you say, okay, we're going to sit together and we're all going to figure out to do the same thing, the initial reaction, as it is in higher ed, is always either, well, we're different, so you can't actually expect us to do what you do, or we're already doing that. But as you get into the work and you build the trust and you have the relationships, those dissipate and the work actually is happening. So it's, the tensions are the ones that you would expect in higher ed.
Sure.
The sense that everybody is unique and different, everybody's special, except they're not.
Right, right. President Crow, did you have doubts about the collaboration and whether it would really create a meaningful change? Because I know your institution, like the others at this stage, is doing a lot of this work. Did you feel like the collaboration would really pay off?
Usually the process of getting universities to work together on something is so complex that whoever survives that process of going through the discussion is committed. So it's a fantastic opportunity then to work with schools that have decided that it's in their interest and in the community's interest overall, and in the students' interest in particular, to start innovating together. So once we got 11 chancellors and presidents together who with their teams and their faculty thought that there was a lot to do together. We could sign up for these goals together, we could work together, we could innovate together, we could innovate in different levels together. That was all theoretical in a sense until we started moving together. So I didn't have doubts that it would work. I think that I had concern that we might not be able to get off to a quick start, but we have gotten off to a quick start. It's worked better than I think any of us could have imagined, in the sense that we've got innovation clusters now going on in financial aid, and we've got innovation clusters going on in areas like admissions, and we've got innovation fellows on all of the campuses that are working together and networking together, and then we've got the chancellors and the presidents working together, and so it's worked out really well. So I didn't have doubts once we went through the process, which is always in academia one, which is if you think that there's a skepticism in journalism, you want to work where we work.
I've gathered. Yeah.
Skepticism is everyone's middle name.
Sure. I'm going to hopefully click through here to a couple of the results. Maybe not. I'm trying. Here we go. Okay. So these are big numbers, particularly some of what you've been able to achieve. There we go. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about scale and really the immediate results you've seen. Obviously, some of these initiatives were in place already. I mean, we can all agree that higher ed isn't usually the most nimble of industries. to do something at institutions as large as yours and see these immediate results. Who wants to kind of talk about how you did this so quickly? Anyone want to start on that, Bernadette?
So let me make one comment. As you noted, some of the universities, and I think Georgia State is a good example, were already using some of these approaches. And so there was an opportunity to see universities that were doing these things and having some success. And the fact that the idea came from another source at that point was irrelevant. If it was a good idea, if it would work, and there was some chance of using it and having benefit to our students, I think that's what sold the rest of us, that this was something that was worth investing in. So there was some evidence already, even when UIA was formed, that this was the way to go.
I would add to that that didn't mean it was easy. I mean, there was skepticism. And in fact, some of the results we claimed were not trusted. And even before the alliance, we had actually been accused of lying by a number of institutions, myself, my provost, Dr. Rennick, who heads up our student success work, in a variety of venues have been told, you can't have those results, they're not possible.
Meaning it's not possible to have
it's not possible.
ethnic similarity in all academic outcomes, which you guys achieve.
Yeah, eliminate all rate disparities in graduation rates based on race, ethnicity, or income.
Very rare in higher ed.
And so we had some of that skepticism in the beginning. So the key was to get to success very quickly is one of the requirements of being in the alliance is you had to open up your data. And so that the individuals from these institutions, Kansas and Arizona State, as well as the others, welcome in. Here's the data. You look at the data and you tell us what you see. And as soon as people actually had the chance and actually got in the real data, looked at it, all that went away. And so now we did have something that we had results that could be trusted. And so it was a situation where you had to early on open yourself up, be vulnerable, if you will, to inviting everybody else in to see what you're actually doing underneath the hood.
So the only thing I would add to that is that I think all 11 of the schools are deeply committed to their public purpose, and that's no joke. I mean, it's like we understand all the things that we need to do. It's just how do you figure out how to do them? So in our particular case, we had set a series of goals. We are not going to be as successful as we need to be unless our student body is completely representative of the entire socioeconomic diversity of our society, completely. We're not going to be successful unless we figure out how to graduate everyone equally from any family background coming to the university. And so while we'd made lots of progress towards those goals, we had not made enough progress towards those goals, and we could see in all of the other schools solutions that we hadn't understood, hadn't developed, hadn't implemented, couldn't comprehend or whatever. And so what we found in the speed of change here is that we share this goal. We all are constrained, and now we've started learning together. So I think we've said before in some of the UIA, that's what we call this thing, the University Innovation Alliance, is that the most significant innovation on the table is that we're innovating together.
Right.
It's something that doesn't go on, and so this is the most significant innovation itself.
I want to linger on the big philosophical piece before we get into the brass tacks of some of the innovations and how you've shared. Is anyone from Syracuse University here by chance? So I can speak.
I went there.
You did, yeah.
He's a graduate.
So well, you know the story then. I mean, this is an institution under its previous leader that decided, we've got to get more active in our backyard, which is extremely impoverished.
What Nancy wanted to do when she was chancellor.
Exactly, right? Nancy Cantor. And in some ways, they paid a price in some measures of prestige. And I know there was quite a bit of pushback from faculty, from others, I don't know, from the board. And she's moved on. They actually were somewhat voluntarily, somewhat involuntarily shown the door to the AAU, the Association of American Universities, which is really the most prestigious group of universities in the country. So the goals that you're talking about, socioeconomic diversity, being open to everyone.
But even in the framing of your question, so you say they're the most prestigious universities in the country. Some of them are extremely prestigious. Yeah, but what I mean is that we live in this world where the status of institutions now is a function of scarcity.
Yeah, absolutely.
The scarcity, the higher your level of scarcity, the larger number of applicants that you have versus the number that you admit, like the school I came from, Columbia University, then the higher your status.
Yeah, schools brag in press releases to us every year about the number of applicants they get and how few they admit.
Okay.
Right.
And may I add to that, the universities in the University Innovation Alliance are quite different from one another.
Right.
The commitment to the public purpose, the commitment to the creating the workforce for the next generation, all of that is common. But some of the universities have admission requirements such that only the top 8 to 10% of high school graduates can be admitted. Others of the university admit 90% of the students who enroll. And so what will be progress may not be exactly the same. It'll be better than what each one of us is doing. And so there's a wide variety of differences among the universities. And I think that's good. It means that there will be a tough test of what we're trying to do. If it can work in institutions that are widely distributed geographically and have different kind of programs and a different student body.
Right.
Michael said this very eloquently on a visit to Georgia State before there was an alliance. And he was giving a public presentation, and I'll never forget it because he stood up and he said, some universities are known for who they exclude. We want to be known for who we graduate.
Right.
That's a very different way of looking at what is your purpose.
Yeah.
Right, and so I guess what I would add to that is that I think that we'll measure our success when we can say, and I think all the universities in the Alliance share this as a goal, as an objective, that any kid from any family, regardless of income, ethnic background, educational circumstance, if they're a hard worker, if they're a hard charger, if they can do what needs to be done, they have a chance to be, and then you add whatever you want, a great engineer, a great this, a great that. That's what a public university is supposed to be. A private university is a different creature.
Good point.
It's a different thing, but it all gets mushed up together as if somehow they're performing the same mission when they're not. They're performing a similar
is obviously
mission.
private, so it
Yes.
is different. Yeah.
Yes.
But I totally agree with you, and I think our nation's goals depend on this. So we're all in agreement about this. But I think at times you're taking one for the team. You're going forward in a way that you may not be rewarded in certain measures. And were there difficult conversations with your board or others? I mean, to really commit to this.
Well, for us, they're not difficult conversations. It was actually easy conversations because our governor has signed on to Complete College America with the Complete College Georgia initiative. You got the White House with their own college completion goals. I mean, this is getting on message with where the rest of the country is.
Sure.
But saying we're going to actually do it and we're going to do something meaningful. When we get done, you're going to see this many thousand, tens of thousands, 60,000 more graduates from these institutions than you saw when we started. That's actually easy to get people on board to. The question is can you do it and can you sustain it? And that's what we have to do, is we have to actually show that you can actually achieve these goals that we've set for ourselves.
So our board, my board, it's sort of two parts to it. So one part is we're going to be a university which is egalitarian in its access, as is Kansas and Georgia State. We're going to have 50% of our students from the lower half of family incomes. We're going to have, if there's a poverty line at 20% of the population, 20% of our students are going to come from families at or below the poverty line, and that's where we are. But at the same time, we're going to measure, based on what Mark just reminded me of, our success is going to be a function of who do we graduate. So we've taken 150 graduation outcomes. How many awards did you win, and your jobs, and this, and graduate schools that you can go to, and Teach for America volunteers, or whatever it is. So we've picked those as our targets. Our targets of attainment are output targets of attainment. Right. And we're holding ourselves accountable to that. So I sent around a little snarky note to a bunch of people a week or so ago, and I said, I guess the loser over here, ASU, with this different sort of approach to admitting 40% Pell eligible students now, and half from the lower half of family incomes. Well, we were third in Fulbrights awarded to any school, and first in faculty Fulbrights awarded. Now, that means that that's a particular niche that we can compete in. We're competing in all of these niches with high quality graduates, and that's how we should be measuring the success of universities, is built on product, not input.
And I will add that it was not a difficult conversation with our board as well, because they are concerned about the rate of graduation across the population, just as we have just described. And anything that we would be able to do to increase the graduation rate of that target population would be seen as beneficial. I think for all of us, if there is a place where there would be a hit, it would be in some of the ratings like U.S. News and World Report, where you get measured by the percentage of people you reject, which is what we're That's probably the place where it's a negative
Or by how much
effect.
you spend per student.
That's right.
Which seems perverse. If you can actually be more efficient, shouldn't that be rewarded? Instead,
right.
in some cases, it's punished.
So Mark, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the work at your institution that others have picked up on?
Well, I think the first big project we got underway with the Alliance is actually, it's an Arizona State, Georgia State project where we both have looked at new ways of doing college advising, student advising. And so, the disruption that happened to our campus was a sit-down meeting, first with the deans and then with all the advisors, saying, that leaving this to the department chairs and the colleges isn't working. We've got all the advising logs, we've seen what's been going on, and we see what the results are, which is students that aren't making progress that should be. Somebody should actually be given better advice. So we centralized it, but we centralized it by bringing in a software platform, in our case, produced by EAB, but there are competitors like Civitas. We basically took every grade for every student, for every course for over 10 years and calibrated the system so that we can actually give students timely advice on whether or not they're in the right major, which courses they might struggle with, and then built that into a system that every night checks on over 400 variables. Now, those don't all change day to day. Some change maybe once a semester at most, but checks every night. And every night that if a flag goes off saying something's changed, that this student's now at risk, it triggers the student and the advisor for a face-to-face meeting in our system. So last year on our campus, 43,000 face-to-face meetings between students and advisors in a 25,000 student population. It's led to much better retention and graduation rates. It's led to shorter times to degree, which has actually led to a reduction in cost of education because the way we're set up, we have to charge by the credit hours, the model that makes sense for our student population. So we've been able to increase graduation rates, numbers of graduates, as well as reduce time to degree and cost to the degree.
So this is impressive work that it's hard to moderate when you can't talk.
There's water.
I'm okay. Impressive work that the President Obama has cited, the media has written about, but at your institutions, it wasn't your work. I mean, this is new. What Georgia State is doing is really groundbreaking, I can say that. So in higher ed, if it isn't your idea, as you mentioned, it's hard to jump on it. And how did that work at your institutions?
For me personally, it's not difficult. There might be some people on our campus for whom it's difficult, but I think generally there is acceptance of it. I think you have to think of what we're doing as an intervention, and there's intervention in all areas of work. It can be medical interventions, behavioral interventions, and a critical component of any intervention is defining carefully what the problem is. Right. And then designing a number of things that you're going to do and defining them in a replicable way that someone else can do it. And I think that is what's happening here. It's an intervention. You get a good idea of what the problem is. You design the intervention, and then you work to see which populations it works with. And that's what we're trying to do. And I think if you look at it in that way, it really is easy to endorse it wholeheartedly. We're at a much more beginning stage in the process than that, but I am eager to see where it's going to go.
I mean, it makes sense to a layperson. If it's got proven results, why not give it a shot?
Yeah, but part of what I talk about all the time is we teach students this method, we call it the scientific method, but it has not been the history and practice of higher education to actually do it. We just teach it.
I think that what I would add is that one of the things that we've been able to successfully do at ASU is alter the trajectory as the institution emerged as a leading research university and all the grants we've been winning and hundreds of millions of dollars of funding and so forth and so on. That generally means that the university becomes more and more faculty-centric. We were able to blunt that normal evolutionary pattern and maintain a focus on students, maintain a culture built on student centrism. That means then that when an idea comes in from Kansas or Georgia State or Texas or any of the other schools that are a part of our alliance, or if a technology is coming in from the outside from a company that's built some sort of tool that we can use, that we can integrate into what we're doing, there's no pride of the typical faculty-centric ownership of anything. It's only about what's going to help our students to be more successful. And when you start measuring everything you're doing around student success, everything that you're doing around student success, all that old traditional, monk-like structure of a Middle Ages institution thinking that a bunch of geniuses can solve everything on their own. Well, we have a bunch of geniuses. These geniuses, however, are taking ideas from others, focusing all these solutions on student success, And so at least in our case, and I think in the case of the Alliance schools, we're getting better outcomes. And by the way, I mean, just to put things into perspective, the Alliance schools represent more than 5% of all the students in a public university in the country.
Can you talk, just for some of the folks who don't know, the growth at your institution?
At my institution?
Yes.
So we operate now in multiple realms. So we have what we call our Realm 1, which is full immersion, on-campus, technology enhanced. We have 71,000 students in that realm, achieving the highest set of outcomes that we've ever achieved with the greatest diversity that we've ever achieved. We've taken our 3,400 faculty members, and we've been able to attach to them a Legoed technology platform with 150 technologies from other companies. That then has allowed them to now have 20,000 degree seekers in an online program that we have, 5,000 of which are a part of our Starbucks program. That then has allowed another group of 60,000 additional students that will grow to many more than that, who are taking individual courses and individual programs and activities, all from the same faculty, all from the same group. And so it's not about growth, it's about trying to solve problems. You know, half the people that have received Pell Grants in the United States since the 1980s never graduated.
Right.
$500 billion of investment, and half the people didn't get what they sought. And so we're also trying to go back in and repair an outcome which has been very, very negative. And so scale or size is a function of what? It's the size of the problem.
Right.
And so that's what we're really focused on.
You know, underlying what Michael's saying is actually an attitudinal adjustment. For those of us that are baby boomers, I mean, we grew up with this mentality. You will go to the college or the university, you will look to your left, you will look to your right. In 4 years, one of you won't be here. Now, the reality is...
Weed out culture.
Exactly. That was the mentality. And the reality was, if you went to an institution with a high percentage of low-income students, it was look to your left, look to your right. In 4 years, 2 of you won't be here. Now the mentality of this alliance is, if we admit you, you should graduate.
Right.
And that's where we have to get to.
That's a big difference. And to give folks an idea of the scope of the challenge, I mean, some of the numbers I've seen, 31 million Americans have some college credits, no credential. And unlike what you often see in the media, the $100,000 in debt because I went to NYU and studied photography, the real challenge is the $10,000 in debt with no credential. Yep. And it is a national crisis, I think.
Every fall in America, we're right now in a position where in this nation, half the people who start college in the fall will not have a degree in 6 years. Half the people. Would you buy a car that within the life of your loan will not work with a 50% chance? Or would you buy an iPhone that in a 2-year contract is not supposedly not going to work within the life of that contract? Absolutely not, but that's where we are right now.
And so everyone can feel really optimistic. The preparation of incoming students, it doesn't look good on the whole. I mean, you have a big challenge in terms of you don't.
No, I think there is a challenge in the preparation of students. And I suspect at every university, if you were to choose the thing that was the greatest predictor of graduation, it would be the level of achievement that the student had when he or she entered, unless you do something else.
True.
And I think what we're talking about is what else is it that you do. I also want to follow up on one of the things that Mark said, that the attitude of the university, that when you admit a student, there's kind of an implicit promise to that student, an implicit commitment that you're admitting him or her because of the possibility of being successful there. And I think the things that we're trying to do are really putting our money, our effort, behind that implicit promise of you can come here and be successful and get a degree, and take that very seriously.
Right.
So what's happened in our society, it's really kind of sad, even worse than sad. We have allowed ourselves to accept underperforming institutions. We've allowed ourselves to accept something less than 100% high school graduation. We have all these reasons, these excuses, these simple answers,
Sure.
all of people who should be moved out of the way, so that other people who will not accept those answers can move in. And then at the universities, and in particular the public universities, we should be graduating every student that we're willing to admit, because if our admission standards are accurate, they're telling us who we think has the skill set to move forward. And what we do is we accept too many old-style cultural methodologies. The reason that the public colleges had the weed-out culture was so that they could, in a sense, emulate against public policy the private university's selectivity. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, well, we admit all these kids who aren't ready. or who aren't any good or who aren't this or that, but we get rid of them. We get rid of them, creating social disruption, creating broken hearts, creating financial disruption, creating debt overhangs, creating all kinds of things. We have to get to the point where we're graduating nearly everyone, because we've got the means, the mechanisms, the commitment, the tools, the devices to make this happen. You know the statistic as well as I do. So if you're from the bottom quarter of family incomes, your chance of ever achieving a college degree is less than 10%.
Yeah.
1 in 10.
If you're from the top quartile of family incomes, even if you're a low achieving student, not every rich kid is that smart. You guys know that. and so, in fact, you wonder sometimes how it all worked out. But, and so you have an 80% chance of getting a college degree.
Yeah, 90% of them go, and 90% of those graduate.
It's the weirdest thing that you've ever seen. That's just wrong.
And I do think, you all I've definitely done this voluntarily and moved ahead, and frankly, ahead of a lot of your peers. But accountability on those metrics is coming.
Yes.
It's not going to be easy, but President Obama wanted to tie federal aid to outcomes metrics, including things like graduation rates. So it didn't happen. But as the U.S. Congress eventually gets to renewing the Higher Education Act, something about completion is likely to be there, I think. It may be there. I'm not going to make any predictions. So.
But that's why this work is needed. I mean, again, as I mentioned earlier, people used to doubt our results because they were institutions that looked a lot like us, but weren't able to get the results. And be able to say that, okay, you can move from what we used to have a 32% graduation rate to above 50%, and if you actually include transfers going on to 75%, they don't have those results. It's easier to say that can't be right because we've tried and we didn't get it. The other answer is, it would have to be that, well, we've been failing, which is the truth, is we have been failing as a nation in how we approach these particular issues by replicating a medieval model that was developed for a very different student population in a very different time. So we have to literally disrupt how we do things, but perhaps not in the ways that we read about in the press so often. It's not by throwing out the model of higher education. It's by doing a much better job of supporting our students. And one of the key points, and it's been interlaced in a lot of what you've heard, is we're at a point in time where we have technologies that we can embrace that are actually making a big difference. And it's not just technologies, how we deliver education, it's how we advise, it's how we do financial counseling, it's how we do course scheduling, it's how we help students set up their course schedule so that they can actually have a part-time job, make the commute to school, get their classes, and make it all stick together. There's a whole lot of change coming in what I'll call back office technology that actually are big game changers.
Let me just add, and it was in the video that we showed at the beginning, and that is each of the 11 universities on the slide are large-scale public institutions, but they're also all research intensive. They all have a scholarly faculty. And so one of the things that's been a critical error in so many people's thinking is that somehow the role of the faculty member can be taken out of the picture. Oh, I can just get a great lecture from Princeton or Columbia, and that'll be all I need to do to teach economics. As opposed to a great economics faculty member at Kansas or Georgia State or Arizona State who's writing articles, who's advancing theory, who's working with students, who's advancing all of this kind of stuff. And so the notion is that we're also trying to see to it is that students from all family backgrounds and all family incomes have access to teacher scholars, not to robots. And the notion is that these teacher scholars are people who produce a differentiated kind of learning environment. And so you can create all kinds of learning environments, and one of the learning environments needs to be the teacher-scholar learning environment to which kids from every background have access.
So let's talk about the faculty role in this. As the public university presidency is a volatile job. It lasts, I think, on average, last I saw about 8 years, but a little bit less, I think, maybe.
A little bit less, but
these are not real limbs.
Maybe going down that average too. So I've definitely covered presidencies where a president tried a top-down initiative and the faculty rebelled, and that was the end of the president. How did you get buy-in on this? And obviously, it wasn't just you. It was others on your team and faculty members as well, I gather. Bernadette, you want to start on this?
That's a very interesting question. So you don't need faculty buy-in on the goal. Faculty buy-in is already there.
Right.
We have faculty who work in roles as advisors, formal roles as advisors, and also informally. Much of what is being implemented here, however, is something that is added to that personal role of the advisor. I think in all of the universities now, and certainly Georgia State who uses, we're using data in a very comprehensive way to help that advising, whether it's with a professional advisor or a faculty member, so that you know where a student went to school, you know what courses they had, you know how they did in those courses, you know about their background, you know how a student with that background has performed in particular courses on your campus. The advisor is armed with that information in working with the student. And so the advisor is now in a much better and a stronger role to give the kind of advice and direction that a student needs, and whether it's, again, a faculty member to intervene at the appropriate time, more frequently, in a more structured way. And so this is an asset to advisors, and I think the goal is a goal that our universities and other universities already have.
Sure.
One of the things that I also want to say is, in talking about what we're trying to do, I think it's important to say that we're not trying to imply that other universities have not tried to increase graduation rates. I think all of us have tried to increase graduation rates, and I think one of the problems is it has been too vague and too general. The things that we're trying to do have been trying to do and untested, and this is an effort to refine what the issues are and make the right interventions at the right time.
Sure. Sure.
Our experience has been very similar to Bernadette's at Kansas. I mean, faculty pushback to the initiatives was zero. We went into a strategic planning process in 2010. It was ratified unanimously by our university in 2011, and the first goal was that we would establish a national model demonstrating that students from all backgrounds could be successful at high rates. And that was passed unanimously. Then the work gets down to, okay, now we're going to start moving people's cheese. But as just like Bernadette said, very data intensive, because the faculty do respect the scientific method. They do understand data, and that they want to scrub it, they want to look at it, they want to understand it. But as we present data and say this is what we plan to do, and the faculty are very involved in this. I mean, this is a very inclusive process. This is not top down at the institution. I mean, there's certainly leadership behind it, and certainly resources coming from the leadership behind it. But it's very participatory, very data driven, and once you get the facts out there, then you can have a serious conversation, as opposed to perpetuating myths or we already tried that, or whatever the excuse may be.
Sure.
Yeah, our focus has really been on returning empowerment to the faculty. So faculty have been disempowered. They've been disempowered by social ridicule coming from politicians and others. They've been made to, here they devote 20 years of their life to some educational and scholarly development perspective or experience to get themselves ready, and then they get treated in ways by social and political systems nationally that hold them down and make fun of them and throw rocks at them and so forth. And so from our perspective, it's been about, let's empower our faculty on two fronts. One is to be designers of their own fate, so they can design what they want, their own units, their own programs, their own intellectual ideas, and then let's empower them to then focus their true love, which is teaching and scholarship, in ways in which they can be unbelievably expressive. So for us, the introduction of technologies, the new ways of thinking have been ways in which our faculty have been empowered to express their identities, their intellectual identities. And so for us, it's not been a top-down thing. Sure. We've not told anyone to do anything. We've given them the means to do things, and then they take these up on their own, and it's been fantastic. We give them some support, we give them some means, and then off they go.
So I hope you all are thinking of and entering questions. I see a few here, but I'm going to ask one more. So let's talk about the geographic diversity of your partners in this alliance. Have there been some advantages to collaborating across state lines? I mean, you're all competitive with each other in lots of ways, rankings, athletics, but I think in the state, sometimes there's maybe more intense competition.
It's a design principle.
We didn't have any two schools in the same state, so that we could avoid all intra-state rivalries, which are often in public universities manifest themselves in political ways and in governance ways and so forth. And so we're like, well, let's not do any of that. Let's get a set of diverse institutions, some land grants, some big Sun Belt schools that are just growing, some flagships like Kansas and Texas. Let's get these public universities with this diversity of background and purpose. Let's bring them together. Let's demonstrate that innovation can occur and then see what happens.
And it is easier doing it across state lines. I mean, I tried to do this in Georgia, and if, is a president of another university in Georgia going to stand up and say, well, we're going to do what Georgia State does? Well, the message is going to be, well, maybe I should just go to Georgia State and not even consider that other institution.
Sure.
I also think it's very important. I'm not sure I would have thought of it in designing the participants, but I think it's a great idea, and it keeps it out of the political arena, and it keeps one university's progress from having any implications for their funding or stature within the state. And so it reduces the liability associated with participating in it. So it's worked well.
So I'm going to turn to the screen here. I see one that, I've been keeping this fairly high level. We've talked about Georgia State's data-driven advising and interventions, but can you all talk about any other pieces that the innovation is really picking up on, any kind of specific innovations that you'd like to briefly share beyond that? Bernadette, you want to?
Okay. And advising is a very large term. So there is advising in the way that was described that is very technology driven, and we're all implementing that. There's also advising that takes place around forming structured groups of students who meet for advising beyond course selection. And one of the things that we have found since we've been looking at this is that if our students, as low-income students, first-generation students, don't get associated with some group that they identify with and work with early on, their chances of success are very much smaller. Last year, we identified 150 students who were not part of any of those kind of structured programs that we have. We have started then assigning special advisors for them to meet with, not to talk about course selection, but how they're doing, things that they need to do for success. So that is also a kind of advising, but it's not the specific one. So that is another way in which we're trying to be successful with students.
Sure.
I think an early win within the alliances, I mean, the alliances had a number of retreats at different campuses, and I think it was the first one where one university puts out, says, okay, this is the way we look at the student experience. This is, how they are approached at the time they apply. This is the process they go through all the way to being admitted. This is what happens when they get on campus. And all of a sudden, eyes are opening up and saying, well, that makes sense. Just actually map out what happens to a student, which is not the way it was done in the medieval institution, because the student was just there, so to speak. And so a whole bunch of things start coming out. And as Bernadette says, it's not just the advising. We start at each of our institutions recognizing that what we do and how we do it may not be optimal or even nearly optimal.
So here's an example. So you come from a knowledge, like me, I'm a first generation college kid. So if I talk to my parents about going to college, they were like, you should go to the Air Force Academy, they pay for your food. So it's a very simple equation. There'd be no cost. And so what happens though, if you find out in studying your process of interaction that your incoming freshman is getting hundreds and hundreds of messages from 40 different offices at the university, the kid without a parent or someone telling them, oh, well, these are really important messages, these are less important messages, turns out there's kids that will then not attend. They're overwhelmed by the messages. Because there's no consideration. Now, this might sound to those in the audience, it might seem like, well, you people haven't figured this out. Well, it is kind of you people haven't figured this out. And so now we're figuring out that how you communicate, how you interact, what you send, what messages, what incentives are put in place, how you understand the student, interact with the student, when you communicate with the student. All of that was taken as basically a generic template. And it was just meant to, if you survived, you're survived. If you didn't survive, well, too bad for you.
Yeah, and I do think that we can't underestimate the college-going experience in your family. How many students call home and ask how to deal with something? And if you don't have that, you're at a disadvantage.
Yes, without question.
Well, I see this top question just keeps getting thumbs up. How can institutions be transformed to be completely student-centric when tenure focuses predominantly on publishing, grant getting, and not teaching effectiveness? So we're back to the faculty question, which I will admit is at the core of a lot of this.
there's a lot of urban myths out there.
I think so.
Yeah, and so you can't get tenure at my institution unless you're a proven master teacher. Lots of people have not gotten tenure because they can't do that. Lots of people have been weeded out at the third year review, the fourth year review, contracts not renewed at the end of the first year. And so this notion of teaching effectiveness not being a part of the tenure process or the promotion process, it is.
How common is that, though? I mean,
How common? It's not uncommon.
Sure.
And so, I mean,
Becoming more common?
Both as a provost and a president, I've denied faculty tenure because of poor performance in teaching. Yeah.
So the point though is that the publish and grant getting and so forth, what we've done, and perhaps it's different at the different schools, is that what we're trying to give to a faculty member with tenure is not a lifetime appointment. I say this over and over. We're trying to give a lifetime license, a license to advance your ideas as a teacher, a license to advance your ideas as a scholar. And so it's not somehow, if you're a great researcher, you're going to get tenure and then teaching's a secondary thing for you. We've had a number of conversations at my institution. If you're not interested in teaching, you really ought to work somewhere else.
Yeah, at an institute. Well, on top of that, I think there's this myth that it's teaching or research.
Exactly.
But early in my career, I actually had the responsibility as an associate dean to review every single faculty member every year in concert with their respective departments.
This is in public health.
Yeah, it was actually Associate Dean for Public Health at the University of Michigan back in the 1990s. I had to review every faculty member every year in concert with the department chairs as part of the pay raise evaluation process, as well as promotion process. And the first aha moment was the people who got rated as the best professors were also the best teachers.
Yes, absolutely.
And the answer is they're the best communicators. The people who get published, the people who get grants are very effective at explaining what they do and why it matters. They're also great teachers. So they actually go hand in hand, even though the myth is that they're actually opposites.
Well, we have a society that likes to discuss things in either or.
Yes.
But, yeah.
And I agree. The universities that I have been associated with evaluate teaching thoroughly. It is the case that in a university like ours, research productivity is certainly very highly evaluated, but that is not at the expense of looking at teaching effectiveness. And at both institutions, I know faculty who have been terminated typically before tenure because of teaching. And I don't know if that's a pattern, although it seems to me that when teaching is really very poor, it doesn't take 5 years to find that out.
Yeah, so we review it 1 year, 3 years, 4 years, and then pre-tenure, and there's a lot of people that don't make it through the process because they're not good teachers.
And most universities, and I would gather all these, have programs within the institution to help faculty who are identified early on to help them actually become better, more effective teachers.
Sure.
And that's an important point. The faculty development centers do put a lot of time and attention into that.
Sure. Yep. So this top question looks like the cost question. So if it is a goal of the UIA to break the wealth inequality gap preventing students from getting an education, what are you doing to lower student costs? I just recently mentioned the micro grants that Georgia State does, but does anyone else, or do you want to talk about that? Or as a piece of UIA, have you addressed that, I should say?
It's one of the 4 goals of the UIA. So one of the goals are produce more graduates from low-income families in particular, innovate together and lower cost to produce graduates. And so we're all committed to that. And I guess what I would add is that by every means necessary, we're trying to lower costs. And it's lower costs against what? Against what competition? Against what standard? And so we live in a world where knowledge is not contracting, it's expanding. The learning rates, the learning methodologies are not simplifying, they're becoming more complicated. The use of technology and everything is not going down, it's going up. So in many ways, it's can you lower costs against others? I saw that USC just announced a $50,000 tuition for the first time in their history, having increased their tuition every year since 1968. And so our tuition is $10,000 for an in-state student, $10,500, but our average in-state student after grants pays under $4,000 a year. And so I'd call that cost containment.
Sure, and in a difficult state funding environment.
We have a difficult state funding environment.
Yes, we all do.
This is a complicated question, and Mike has alluded to some of them. At University of Kansas, we have increased tuition substantially over the last 15 or 20 years. If you eliminate the effects of the consumer price or educational price index and the effect of loss of state funding, the amount of actual increase to the student is $200 or $300 over more than a decade. So there are many things that go into what college costs. And yes, it does cost too much, but there are many factors. One of the most important ways that we can reduce costs to students is by having them be effective in the selection of courses and having them graduate and leave the university in the shortest amount of time possible. You can do this by the type of procedures that we're talking about. If you think of the students who are taking courses that they don't need or that are unrelated to their graduation, if you can do effective advising, you can reduce that. You can reduce the time to graduation. All of those things substantially reduce the cost of a college degree to students.
Completion and debt are related.
Exactly.
Exactly. We spoke about data, we spoke about the advising. How we made the move to the system we have is it takes 120 semester credit hours typically to get a Georgia State degree, and we had this small army of students with 130 credit hours that I referred to as they were just circulating. They were accumulating credits but weren't getting an inch closer to graduation. And now what our advising system does is if you sign up for a course that is not going to count towards your degree, that's one of those alerts that triggers a meeting between you and your advisor. Right. So it's to be more efficient at that. But our next step is to take this big data analytics approach that we're using in advising into financial counseling. That's another thing that we're working on at Georgia State. Be able to look at, because you take a student, we're 60% of our students are Pell eligible. Okay, 60% low income. So you're taking individuals who've never had a bank account, who probably in many weeks or months didn't know where the next meal was going to come from or the rent was going to be paid. And now you give them a Pell Grant and you give them a Hope Scholarship in the state of Georgia, which means they have the resources to be able to afford our tuition, which is less than $10,000. But they have to manage those resources. Right. Neither of those are forever. They all have constraints. They all have regulatory procedures. They're not the same. And so you're taking an individual who's never managed a checking account, let alone this kind of money, and having to do it. So that's another piece where we have to basically do that part that the second and third generation student has their parents to do for them. Right. Somebody that can answer those questions. Meaning, people ask, are we dumbing this down? No, the kid whose parents went to college gets all sorts of calls and they get help. We're trying to provide that same help to the student that doesn't have anybody to call and ask those questions.
Would you mind very briefly talking about your emergency aid program? Because I do feel like it's a national
so the Panther retention grants. So this was one where we were noticing that we had students who were within a semester or two of graduating. Again, database. They were close to graduating and they weren't coming back to school. And so we did something very innovative, very high tech. We called them up and said, why are you not coming back to school? And in almost every case, or the overwhelming majority of the cases, was I'm $300 short of being able to pay my bill. In the state of Georgia, we cannot let you enroll unless you can pay 100% of the bill at the beginning of class. That's a policy that we have to follow. That's one of the rules in the state. At the same time that we found that out, my wife and I had made a small gift to the university, said we're going to give you this many tens of thousands of dollars. We just want you to find a problem that's hard, that you've been working on. Don't use it to do something you're already doing. Go try something new. And so they took that money and some of these students and said, okay, we can give you that $500. Students can't apply for it. They now ask if they can apply for it. They can't. It's actually in the system. You look at students who are close to graduation. We now can see what their financial unmet need is. And they get identified that if we give them this small amount of money, and I shouldn't say give because there is a quid pro quo. There are certain things the students have to do in return. There are expectations or obligations that they have to do, certain things they have to do if they get the money. And it's been phenomenally successful, keeping students in school who historically did not come back. And once they stop out, it's harder to get them back.
For a first-generation low-income student, $300, $500 can make or break.
Oh, absolutely, because there is no checking account to go to. There is no safety net.
Right. I see this top question. Specifically, what groups or groups within your respective universities are in charge of managing and coordinating your UIA related? Who on campus is doing this? Anyone want to? take a crack at that?
We have in the Provost's office a Vice Provost who's Director of Undergraduate Studies, who is the primary person, but also the Admissions Director, Director of Enrollment Management is involved in the program. Our institutional research person, who provides all of the data and is going to be involved in the analysis, is involved in all of these, have made trips to communicate with others in similar programs. The Provost, of course, but the three people that I mentioned, along with the Director of Advising, would probably be the key people.
Anyone different on your campus you want to mention?
We use a position at our institution called Senior Vice President and University Planner, but it's not an architect or a designer. The University Planner role is a position that integrates academic planning with financial planning, with strategic planning into a single function. And so we use that particular officer to coordinate this, and then that officer then works with people in all of the other areas of the university to help then facilitate the innovation process and the integration process of change.
You have fellows from UIA at each institution?
Yeah, that's part of it. Our model is similar to Bernadette's. We have an associate provost who's also vice president for enrollment management, Dr. Rennicker referred to earlier. But then on top of that is our provost, who actually used to be one of your colleagues, Risa Palm, actually has an 8:30 meeting. It must end by 9 a.m. So Tim is at that table with the vice president for student affairs, the vice president for research, the associate provost for institutional effectiveness. Everybody's at that table. So these conversations are taking place every day. On top of that, then within my cabinet, we get regular reports on progress, and my cabinet meets weekly, but then we have a monthly meeting of what's called the Administrative Council, which is all the deans, it's all the vice presidents, the executive committee of the University Senate, president of student government, head of the University Staff Council, and we do a report there every month, so that this is a participatory, involved process, and every month these issues are being discussed, progress is being reported, challenges are being identified.
Coordination sounds like it's pretty key to this across these institutions.
Yes.
So we have 3.5 minutes to discuss the future accreditation and concepts for combined degrees with your classes, MOOCs, community colleges, and other degrees to lower the cost of education. A tough question about the unbundling and partnerships. So does this domain have any promise in UIA?
So one of our innovations that other schools will be looking at, just at ASU as an example, is community college transfer. We have 150 automatic transfer points. If you take these courses in any community college, you move in, you make these things happen. And so all of us are interested in figuring out how to make it a seamless process, how to overcome decades of cultural ambiguity between the community colleges and the universities. And so this is an important area. And then to the second part of Rudy's question, this notion of other courses, MOOCs, and all kinds of other things, I think there's going to be all kinds of ways that we look at these things in different ways once we are satisfied, our faculty are satisfied, I should say, that the content is solid in wherever this other content input is coming from. And so that's an area, I think, for future innovation.
Transfer and completion, I know, is a huge issue. I mean, I think I'll probably garble the numbers, but a large number of community college students say they want to earn a bachelor's degree, and very few do, ever.
Well, for us, so last fall we had 25,000 undergraduates. More than 20% of them started at what used to be known as Georgia Perimeter College. Now, effective January, Georgia Perimeter College, which is a 2-year institution that gives associate's arts and associate's of science degrees, is actually part of Georgia State University to try to make this more seamless. So we can actually have one seamless we don't even have to have an articulation, it's just all part of the same system. So we can actually, among other things, we can advise a student. Let's say Michael applies to our institution and we say, well, actually for financial reasons, you might want to start at Perimeter College where the tuition is going to be lower. It maintains the same tuition structure it had when it was a 2-year institution. So we can do that. On the other hand, the MOOCs part is actually quite interesting to me because when the MOOCs movement came out, I immediately went to our Senate, the chair of the Committee on Academic Standards, and said, I expect somebody's going to come in here and say, look, I took calculus from MIT, I aced the course, I want credit for it. So we went through our Senate process, and right now, any student can petition to have a MOOC count for Georgia State credit, and almost nobody ever does.
Yep. Why do you think that is?
Oh, I think part of it is with low-income students, actually, they need the structure of a real institution. Yeah. That to be successful in a MOOC is a different sort of individual than what our typical student is.
And we've had some of the same efforts with regard to the community colleges. Over the past 2 or 3 years, there have been a series of efforts to articulate courses so that you know the specific course credit content and so on, and transfer so that students don't run into difficulty. With the community college that we have the largest number of transfers, which is about 40 miles from us, we have advisors from the university placed there so that students at the community college can get direct advising about the transfer of courses. We have not had very much involvement with transfer of MOOCs, but with one of the other institutions that is a part of the Alliance, we have been working together on online courses where each university would develop a set of courses different from the other, but they would be available to students on both campuses. We haven't gotten to that point yet, but that is one of the projects under discussion.
Cross-institutional content.
That's right.
Well,
That's right.
we are right on time. You all had some great questions I didn't get to. I apologize, but I hope you'll give a big hand of applause to our great panelists.